the day today, and I request Miss Maryam to please come over and be seated. All right, Miss Maryam will now start with the presentation. And as Miss Atiya Randhawa has just announced that it's an interactive workshop, so we will have questions in the end if you have any. But during the workshop, if you feel like asking any questions, ushers are there and they will approach you for the questions. So I hope you have a nice, productive time. Yes, Miss Maryam, please start over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm loving all the discussions that have been going on since morning, and I hope that you can leave here today with some practical tips. Like if you're like, yes, I'm all for raising children who will change the world, but what do I do? When my child is on the floor screaming, what do I do? You know, if I'm telling my child to turn off the electronics, what do I do? You know, the trouble I'm having with parents, or the trouble that parents are having these days, is not that, you know, they're justifying wanting to discipline their children harshly. Nobody wants to. Most parents I work with do not want to, discipline their children harshly. But something ends up happening that you don't know what's happened, and you've already yelled at your child. You've already hit them, and well, you don't know what's happened. And that's kind of where my journey began about 8 years ago, when I found myself on the kitchen floor of my room with my 2-year-old son. And we were both crying because he had been trying to get my attention. I didn't know how to give him what he needed from me and also give myself what I needed. And so I had hurt him, and we were both sitting on the floor crying because he was feeling betrayed by someone that he loves. And I never wanted to be that parent. I never wanted to be the parent who hurts their child. I was never one of those people who thought all children need is a good slap, something like that. I was never one of those people. And here I was doing something I never wanted to do. And that started me on the journey, which brings me here 8 years later. I hit the library and I was like, I'm going to find out everything there is to know about parenting, because it's the one thing I felt like white people have it figured out, So I was in the US. So I was like, I'm gonna crack the code. So that's kind of what I'll be sharing today. So the good news is that you don't, these are not the things that you have to do, right? So a lot of parents these days feel the pressure that they have to enroll their children in these, amazing extracurricular activities. There's a time, there's a space for them for sure. But what we're going to be learning here is much simpler than all these things. And it's mostly cheap, unless you cater the cost for therapy. Therapy is not cheap. After school tutoring, right? A lot of people think that, all my kid needs is, more tutoring, because my kid is not doing well. And if you were here for the discussion before this, I loved how all these really amazing people who are changing the world were saying, there's so much more to school than academics. There's so much more to childhood and children than academics, right? Harsh discipline, again, that's not what children need, and that doesn't help them. And I already said, you don't have to worry about fancy extracurricular activities. If you can do them, that's good. It's mostly, parents enjoy them because we didn't get to do a lot of that stuff. But is that what's needed? Not really, no. It's what children need is much, much simpler. Bear with me as I figure this out. So look at these two brains. And what is your first sort of thought about these two brains? They're both brains of children. What would you say? Why is one brain smaller than the other? Yeah.
All right, anybody who wants to answer this question, maybe you can raise up your hands. Why do you think that there's a difference in these two brains? No responses. They develop differently.
Yes, they've developed differently. How so, though? Because they're both the brains of 3-year-old children. The age is same.
Stand and
Yeah.
do it, Ms. Maryam. Yes.
So that's the difference. So that is a healthy developing child. And the second one is from an orphan in Romania, where the doctor who published this, Bruce Perry, he was doing this research and he was studying the MRIs of children's brains. So he came up with it. You know, this is what abuse and neglect does. And abuse is not, they don't even have time to discipline children there in those orphanages. So the abuse is essentially neglect or emotional neglect, you know? There's not a lot of physical abuse involved even. More often than not, it's just neglect. Is nobody cares. Nobody cares about these children. And so this is a very, very drastic difference. Thank you for your patience as my brain gets used to this difference that this is here, but I have to point there. So did I go back? Okay. So how do we do this? How do we, create this healthy brain? And, again, we don't have to do any research because the researchers have already found this out. And can you see if you can change it? Maybe that's a better angle. It's this concept called secure attachment. Secure attachment is actually what creates a healthy brain. Remember, so it's not the harsh punishment, it's not the extracurricular activities, it's not you enrolling your child in the fanciest tutoring program. All it takes is secure attachment. But what does secure attachment look like? So researchers define it as where parents are warm and caring, they're responsive, they listen to their children, they care about their feelings, they set boundaries. It's not that they don't set boundaries, but they do it with compassion and they do it with care. And even though there's discipline, there's a routine, there is structure, all of that is there, but all of it is done with warmth and care. And that creates a secure attachment where the children feel like my parent cares. There's somebody in this world who cares about me, and this person is a safe person. So even in the panel discussion earlier, they were talking about safety and how important safety is for children. And so more than anything else, it's creating a safe home environment. It's creating a safe relationship. So we also call that relational safety, right? So this is kind of, you're welcome to take screenshots, by the way, I don't mind. You can take screenshots if it helps you remember. So these are some of the things that I just mentioned, right? And the last 2 points are extremely important because, I can tell you what to do. I can teach you skills, but I cannot make you genuinely like your child. There's no solution for that. So a parent genuinely believes that my child is likable and lovable and capable, right? It's believing that my child is a leader in her or himself. It might not look like my idea of leadership, but he and her is his own best leader. And I'm a facilitator. My job and my role is that of facilitating them. And so that's the single most biggest sort of paradigm shift, that we cannot be successful parents until we genuinely like our children and admire them and think they're basically the best thing on planet Earth, right? So what kind of a parent creates a secure attachment? This is called authoritative parenting style. So they've done a lot of research about parenting styles, different kinds of parenting styles. And the one that I'm talking about is called authoritative parenting style. So again, the researchers have done their job, right? We don't have to start figuring out like, okay, but how do I do this? It's all there for us. And this is why I'm putting in the research. I'll show you some references of research as well, and I welcome you to go look up this stuff yourself if you don't believe me. Because so many parents are like, really, it's that simple? I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? It's hard to do, and we'll talk about that. But this is the kind of parent that we want to be. And how do we become this kind of parent? What do we have to do? So first of all, many of you maybe already are parents. I was a parent, right? I was the parent sitting on the kitchen floor crying because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So think of driving a car, right? How many of you know how to drive a car? I feel like there's more people in this room who know how to drive. Yes, almost everyone. How many of you know how the car works? So you're driving and your car breaks down and you can fix it. You can fix your car. I love that. I love that. There's like 2-3 people who really believe in their ability to fix the car. The car breaks down, they can fix it, right? So just because we become a parent doesn't necessarily we know how a child works. What is their behavior? Why do they have this behavior, right? And I think that's one of the biggest myths that we have. I was once invited to a TV show here in Pakistan, and that's what the host asked me. He said, "Who teaches parenting? Isn't it like natural? You become a parent, you know what to do." And I was like, sure, it's just as natural as you knowing exactly how a bicycle works because you know how to ride a bicycle, or knowing how a car works just because you know how to drive. They're two separate skills. They're two separate sources of knowledge, right? So that's what we're gonna do here, and that's what we have to do as a parent is become a mechanic. We kind of get under the hood of what to do. Did we skip something? Or no, it's okay. That's fine. We can just go back to that. Okay, so these are the attributes of change makers, right? And this is what change makers do. If you want to add something, we can add it. I don't mean to spoon feed you, but I heard a lot of these attributes earlier as well when we were having the workshop about how to change education and what future education looks like, right? If anybody wants to add something, let me know, and kind of just go over this list. What do you think? Can we agree with this list? These are the attributes of change makers. Yeah. Anybody who's creating change in the world, right? And those kind of children we want to raise. Interestingly, these are also the attributes of authoritative parenting. So next slide. So this is the research I was talking about. And the different research says what authoritative parenting does, what kind of children does it produce. And these are quotes from the actual studies. So at the end of the study, they do kind of like a conclusion. And so I highlighted the words that the researchers used in their own research. That we raise children who are helpful, kind, popular, like people like them, right? People liking you begins with your own parents liking you. You can't, if you're someone whose parents never liked you, you're gonna be the designated bad guy in your classroom. You're gonna be the kid nobody likes, right? So that's important. Being popular is not superficial, it's deep. Why do people like people? Because they're kind, because they're loving, because they're helpful. And we all like children to be more responsible. That's always wonderful, right? So all these attributes are, according to researchers and people who study parenting, these are the attributes of change makers, right? So that's what we're going for. So now we are going to figure out, how do we do this? What do we do, right? And like I said, we get under the hood. We sort of become a mechanic. And how do we become a parent mechanic? We learn about kids' brains. That's what we do, right? So you're a parent, yes, yeah, you're a driver, but maybe you're not quite a mechanic, minus like 2-3 amazing people back there, right? Which is wonderful. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the font there, but yeah. So this is us getting under the hood, so to speak. This is us learning about children's brains. So obviously, I have 45 minutes. I cannot turn you into a neuroscientist right now, but neuroscience is also fairly simple when it comes to children because their brains are really simple. They're developing. They're born with a brain that's not at all developed, and it's going to keep developing until adulthood, well into adulthood. So I just want to tell you 3 really simple things about kids' brains. Okay? And stay with me on this because it's a bit neuroscience-y, but I'll check in with you. Okay? The first thing I want you to know is, what is a neuron? How many people know what a neuron is? Yeah.
Basically, neuron is a nerve cell, and it sends messages to the body, and body reacts according to the nerve cells that sends the message, and the body reacts according to that.
Yes, thank you. So, neuron is a nerve cell. It is the basic building structure of our brains, right? So that's pretty much everything you need to know about what a neuron is. Is that it's the basic cell structure of our brain. Our nervous system has a couple of other kind of cells too, but we're mainly concerned with the neurons. So this is what a neuron looks like. Next slide. Okay, so this is kind of what a neuron looks like, right? It has an additional feature that develops for children. So what do I mean when I say children's brains haven't developed? What does that mean? That means that a lot of their neurons look like this, even though they should look like this. So there's a difference, right? We can call this coat, okay? Like it's a coat, it's like an insulation. Why do we need insulation? Why do wires need insulation? What happens? Or what happens if there is no insulation? Yes, the electric current escapes. That's fine. You can popcorn the answers. So the electric current escapes, right? So the information is starting at one corner. It has to travel all the way to the other corner. That's how they interact with each other. But if there's a loss, right, then how is the information going to pass? It's not going to pass. So that's what the insulation is for. It's to preserve the signal. But children don't have that. They don't have that insulation in their neurons. They have them in some neurons, but not all of them. And that's very, very important. We're going to talk about that. Which part of their brain does not have the nice insulation? Take a wild guess. Let's say they have two parts. There's a feeling part and there's a thinking part. Which part does not have insulation? Thinking, yes, yes. Do you know a child who's not emotional? Yeah, children are extremely emotional. They have so many emotions and they have such big emotions, we don't even know what to do with them, right? And we're always worried about our child becoming too sensitive because, the feelings are big and loud, and do they care where they are, right? Are they like, no, I'm gonna wait to show these big feelings when I get home? Right? They're all about the here, the now, let's just go, right? The thinking, however, if you're a parent, how many times you find yourself saying, but they know this, isko pata hai, ye phir bhi aise karti hai. Like she knows this and she still does this, right? So the knowing, there's a lot of loss of information, so to speak. And that's where this comes from. The next thing I want you to know about neurons is how they talk to each other. So this is called a synapse. This is how neurons are communicating with each other. So one neuron says, the very helpful lady who told us what they do, the nerve cells, they send signals to the body, right? So mama said, I have to tie my shoes, okay? So I heard it, that's one neuron where you hear it. But you now have to send that information to the other neuron. Okay, tie the actual shoes, right? And we know half the information's already lost. Somewhere between tie your shoes, we have to go, they've lost it. But even if they have it, what happens? Why do they not do the things that we want them to do? Okay? And for that, I'm just gonna try to explain this as best as I can here. It's a very complicated concept, but I'll try to totally simplify it. So when you're born, a baby has a lot of synapses, like this, okay? So imagine that this whole whiteboard is filled with these dots. And these dots are all synapses. And you're like, but Maryam, you just told us that children don't have a lot of synapses, they don't have a lot of connections. That's true. They don't have a lot of working connections, but they do have a lot of connections. So imagine a city filled with empty apartments, right? Like imagine Dubai. Okay, it's getting built. A lot of the apartments are just empty. Nobody's there, right? So apartments exist, but they're empty. Okay? Now, when the child gets that interaction with their caregiver, that's where the synapses strengthen. Okay? So imagine if a child has a very caring caregiver, a very warm, receptive, secure attachment caregiver. That person, when the child says, they refuses to tie their shoes, the parent says, it's okay, I can help you. That's fine. And so this connection strengthens that of, if I can't do something, I have help. It's okay, I'm not a bad person. However, what if the caregiver doesn't do that? You know? And instead she says, what is wrong with you? Can you just not tie your shoes? How many times have I told you to tie your shoes? How many times do I have to tell you this? You just never listen. Now what is the synapse that's being becoming stronger? What's the apartment who's moving into the apartment? Self-doubt, maybe a little bit of confusion, doubts in your abilities, not believing that you're capable, not believing that you are worth helping. So now you're just not gonna ask for help anymore, right? And so when those things don't happen, which we need to happen, those synapses get deleted. So those apartments are removed, right? Because your brain is trying to be an efficient machine. It doesn't need trillions of synapses. It only needs a few thousand. So a baby has a trillion synapses, trillions. By the time you're an adult in your 20s, you only have a few thousand left. And those are the ones that you used. Those are the ones that got developed through the attachment figure. That's why our childhood is everything. That's why when you go to therapy, you need to talk about your childhood. So your therapist can know where and how did you learn the things that you know. If you think you're a loser, nobody likes you, how did that happen, right? So what are the synapses that we are feeding? What are the synapses that are forming? And this is also really, really important because if we have a very young child, a 2-year-old, for example, they don't have a lot of synapses. So we can change their behaviors really quickly. When we change our habits, we change their synapses. But if we don't, if we have maybe a 10-year-old, it's gonna require more work. So I'll show you a timeline of how the brain develops. So these are the 3 things I've mentioned, right? About the synapses, they are, what can one person summarize what synapses are? You can, okay, yeah. You can just say it. Yes, so they are neural connections, right? And I said, who has more of them? A 2-year-old has more synapses or a 10-year-old? Right. And because a 2-year-old has so much synapses, a 2-year-old also really gets overwhelmed very easily, right? So if you have something to write on, you can write these things that I'm saying so that you remember how, what's the purpose? What's the purpose that I'm saying this to you? That because they have so many synapses, that means that they are, depending what age your child is, it might take more work from you to get to change their habits, right? And it begins with us changing our habits. That's where it begins, because we're the synapse builders, right? We're the real estate builders that come in and do the building, right? The second thing is myelin. So what happens with the insulation? That's what the myelin, the name for it is myelin, the insulation. What happens when there's no insulation? There's a lot of information loss, and additionally, what's that? Yeah, so sometimes you don't know what your mom said or your dad said, because you didn't, the connection is not very strong, right? And the third thing is your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. Can we go to the next slide? Can we go to the next one? There should be a picture of a brain. Maybe, no, another one. Okay, maybe go back. I think yes, this one. So this is your thinking brain. the front part of your brain. This is called the prefrontal cortex, and this is what children think. Oh, I mean, this is how we all think from. Okay? It's called the prefrontal cortex, but I'm gonna try not to use too many scientific terms. Okay? You're not like, you don't have to become a high-level mechanic. Just low level is fine. You can just do some basic fixing and your car is good to go again, right? You don't have to open your own shop kind of mechanic. So we'll call it the thinking brain. It's where all the thinking happens. Then we have the memory brain, which is also here somewhere where the purple is. So the memory brain and the feeling brain are kind of the same part of the brain. Okay? It's called the limbic system. Again, you don't have to know the term unless you want to, but it's called the limbic system. And then the third part, which is the brain stem, is called the survival brain. Can you think of something, can you think of a survival technique? Let's say you see a snake. You're doing a really nice walk in the forest. It's a very lovely day. You're like enjoying the woods, you're enjoying the sun. And then you see a snake. What happens? Do you have time to use your thinking brain? You're gonna run or fight and flight. Instant or autonomous reaction. So it's coming from the autonomous part of our brain. If you all remember 10th class wali biology, right? It's the autonomous nervous system, ANS. Okay? We just call it ANS for fun. Autonomous, It's ANS is our friend. ANS is trying to help us. ANS has a fight, flight, freeze response. There's also now people say fawn, where you sort of become a people pleaser, right? All of those are your ANS tools, to keep you safe. So that's why we call this survival brain. You already know what the feeling brain is, because if you're a parent, you're very familiar with your child's feelings, right? And big feelings. And what's important to remember is because children have so many synapses, the world is a very scary place for them. Okay? It's, imagine owning that many empty apartments. It's like, what am I going to do with all these? I have no resources. I have no real estate manager. I have nothing. So the world feels like a very scary place to children. And so their feeling brain is very easily activated. They're kuch hua nahi, and they're having a lot of big feelings. Yes? As a parent, can you relate to that? ये तो कुछ होता ही नहीं और रोना शुरू कर देती है. I don't know why he's always crying. छोटी-छोटी बातों पे. Yes? So that's because they have a very sensitive feeling brain. Can you imagine why? Why a child needs to have a very sensitive feeling brain? What is something that's true for children that's not true for adults? Yes, so they don't have a lot of cognitive abilities, right? That's one fact we know, right? That the thinking brain is not very developed. But what else, Oh, security, right? So children are very vulnerable. Human children are extremely vulnerable. Does anybody know a lot about mammals? Like, what is the longest time any mammal spends with their parent? I think it's the elephant. Don't quote me on this, right? I think they spend a maximum of 1 year or 2 years with their parents. Human children spend at least 18 years. If you're Pakistani, probably, much more. Yeah, exactly. So why is that? Why is that? That's because children are so vulnerable. They need their parents, not just for food, not just for sleep, not just for clothes and education, but they literally need them to keep themselves alive, right? A child would not survive. When we see all those children on the roads, begging, our hearts break because we're like, how is this child surviving? And we know that this child is dealing with serious trauma, right? So that's something that I want you to remember about children, that they're mostly operating out of their survival brain and their feelings brain. And their memory brain is also developing. They have no long-term memory until about age 4. Do you guys remember? Very few people remember like bits, pieces here and there from when they were babies, right? Because before you're 4, you actually don't have any explicit memory. hippocampus. That's the part of your brain that stores explicit memories. You have implicit memories. That's why the first 2 years of a baby's life are very important, because they don't have any explicit memory, but they have implicit memory, which is they remember the feelings and the sensations, right? So, and that's why as adults we often get triggered, because we don't know why we get triggered. That's our implicit memory acting, okay? So now, the thinking brain. Sometimes children do use their thinking brain, even a little baby examining her feet and her hand, right? She's kind of thinking like, ooh, these are cool, what are these? So even a baby does use thinking brain. But because their feeling brain is so sensitive, something funny happens anytime their feelings are triggered. So remember, their feeling brain is there to keep them safe, right? That's the purpose. That's why they have a very sensitive feeling brain and survival brain, right? A little thing happens, it gets triggered, because the point is to keep it safe, keep the child safe. So let's say your child is doing homework, right? You're helping your child with her homework. And, because your implicit memory related to homework is stress and anxiety, you get upset with your child when they make a little mistake. And you're like, kya, ye kya kar diya? Abhi to samjhaya tha. Now you've activated the feeling brain and the survival brain. So imagine that this is our brain, okay? I want you to hold this up, hold up your fist, because I want you to go home today and teach this to your children, okay? This is our brain. And the front part, this is our, what is this? Thinking brain, yes. Open it, and what is this? Feeling brain, yes. And the memory brain, okay? And now open just with your palm, and what is this? What's left here? Survival brain. This is what Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's a famous psychiatrist, pediatrician, he calls this a brain in your hand, okay? So now do it all over again, close it up. Your child is using their thinking brain, they're doing something, in learning, etc. You get mad, you get upset, they flip their lid. It's just not online anymore. The thinking brain's gone. And all they're left with is their feelings and their survival, fight and flight. So the good news is, this is what I love so much about parents today. This is what I love about all of you who are here. लोग कहते हैं ना आजकल के बच्चे बहुत बदतमीज हैं. They're not बदतमीज. You have not terrified them, and so they are mostly in their fight response. When a child becomes very, very scared, which response do they go to? Freeze. In a perpetual freeze response. You're nervous, ants, remember ants? Ants decide, you know what? It's not safe. I can't have a voice. I can't talk. My feelings are not welcome. So I'm just gonna freeze. I'm gonna do as I'm told. So whenever I see a very compliant child, I'm very worried. Children are not meant to be compliant, They're messy and they're crazy and they're like, imagine you just landed in a brand new country like Turkey, right? And you just want to stop everywhere. I just say Turkey because Turkey is like just the way Istanbul's like layout is just so fascinating. You just want to pause the car and be like, wait, what is this? What's happening here? That's how children are when they arrive in this world with a trillion synapses. They're like, gotta fill up all those apartments, have a lots happening here. So they're feisty and they're loud and they, can't sit still because life is just too exciting. They're interested in food when they're 8 months old, and after a year, food was so yesterday. They don't care about eating, They just want to do. So when I see a very compliant child, I'm very worried, So compliance is not at all what we're going for. How many of you are in the workforce and think that compliance is a very important tool in the workforce? Oh yeah, I love my employee, he's so compliant. What are people looking for in employees? What kind of qualities? Innovation, creativity. What's that? Dynamic, yeah. Do those sound like children? Innovative, dynamic, creative, eager learners, yes? You'll never hear an employer say, I'm hiring you because you're very compliant. I can see that, you know. The employers want employees that are innovative, creative, outside the box thinkers, doers, initiative takers, right? So those are the things that change the world. Those are the qualities, remember, of change makers. And those are the ones we want to cultivate. Now, is that convenient as a parent? No, hell no. No. Who promised, as a parent, who promised you that parenting would be convenient? No one, right? No one ever says, congratulations, now that you're becoming a parent, it's going to be so convenient. Your life is about to become very convenient. So it's very inconvenient. There's no doubt about it. Having a child who is not living in the freeze mode of their brain it's hard. It's not easy, you know. I had a client who was, I guess you must have been an Imran Khan fan. I have no comment about that. But she said something like, wow, his mother must have really nurtured those qualities, you know? He must have been a crazy kid. I really want to ask his mother, was he a crazy kid? Because look at what an awesome leader he is now. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you have the right idea. Yes. I'm sure if we ask his mother, she'll confirm that he was a crazy kid, right? All right, next. So these are kind of the things. Next. And next. And this one. So these are the three brains we've talked about: the survival brain, the feelings brain, and the thinking brain. Yeah? And what I want you to know is, because we've already talked about what the different brains do, right? And what I want you to remember is that obviously the survival brain is developed at birth, right? Can you see why? Can you see why even babies need a survival brain? Yeah. And then with feelings, about 7 to 9 years is when the memories start to form around age 4, right? So some part, obviously they're already born with some part of their feelings brain, which means the myelin, the insulation, all of that is already there. But it's still developing. They're developing those memories. They're developing more complex feelings, right? So a baby maybe has 2 or 3 feelings, like hunger and a need for touch, something like that. But a toddler has much wider variety of feelings. And then as they get older, there's even more feelings, right? My friend hurt my feelings. She wouldn't play with me, you know? So there is rejection now. There's disappointment and all of that. And then our thinking brain, which most parents wish that their children started at. Like we all wish our kids were born with this. It doesn't even come online before age 4 or 5. So before age 4 or 5, children are drastically just feeling human beings, right? And it doesn't finish developing until age 25 to 30. So in the US, we joke that, we people who work in this child development field, that car insurance companies are the only people who've cracked the code. Because when I landed in America, I was 22 years old. My car insurance was double of my husband, who was 27. So they're like, you know what? She does not have good impulse control, you know? We are not gonna hand a car insurance policy to someone who doesn't even have impulse control. And for teenagers especially, how many of you have teenagers? So teenagers are basically three-nagers, you know? So a lot of the brain development happens between age 0 and 12. And at 12, your brain decides, you know what? It's time to renovate my brain. So I'm gonna get rid of some more synapses, and I'm gonna start over a little bit. I'm gonna remember some things, but I'm gonna start over. And so they enter a whole new phase of development. And there's more synaptic pruning. This is called synaptic pruning, when they cut off, when your brain decides to get rid of the synapses it doesn't like, right? So the teens are even more melodramatic, right? Because imagine living through a construction zone. Have you ever done it? You're like, मैं ऊपर का portion, नया करवा लेती हूँ, नीचे मैं रह लेती हूँ. नीचे हम रह लेते हैं, and ऊपर का portion is getting construction. It's hard, right? And so teens, if you pay attention to them, literally are having a really hard time. They're really struggling. And their impulse control, their risk-taking behavior goes high. Because what else do you need to be a really good employee? a risk taker. So you practice your risk-taking skills when you're a teen, you know. So I tell parents to allow their child to indulge in healthy risk-taking behaviors, enroll them in sports that are high risk, They are relatively safe, but there's a little bit of risk involved. So now the question is, how do we do this? How do we take all this information and actually construct this awesome brain? Yeah. These are the two skills, co-regulation and kindly strict boundaries. So whenever I talk about this, mostly I think people get this idea that this is, everything I'm talking about, we call it respectful parenting, okay? Which really just means treating children like people, They're just like us. They're not a different species. Like, when people say, lekin kabhi kabhi to, बेइज्जती करनी पड़ती है, sometimes you have to be harsh. And I ask them, is that how you learn? Oh, that somebody is harsh with you? What do you guys think? Do you learn when somebody is harsh with you, especially when you make a mistake? How many of you like harshness when you make a mistake? You're like, yes, boss ne meri बेइज्जती की, मुझे बड़ा मजा आया. I really learned a few lessons, जो आज मैंने सीखे वो मैं इससे पहले कभी नहीं सीख सका, right? So अगर बड़ों को बेइज्जती अच्छी नहीं लगती तो बच्चों को क्यों अच्छी लगती है? Are there different species? Of course not. They're also people. So that's what it means when we say children are people. And respectful parenting is recognizing and honoring that children are people and teaching them with the same respect. You can only teach respect to someone by treating them with respect, right? You can't lecture them into becoming a respectful human being. So how do we do boundaries with respect? They are a part of respect. Pick up any relationship from your life where you're really having trouble showing respect to someone. And I'll show you that you need to set boundaries in that relationship, that you're not setting enough boundaries. If you find yourself being rude and disrespectful to your mother-in-law, probably because you're not taking good care of your boundaries. If you are feeling like your boss is mistreating you, your boss is taking advantage of you, it's because you're not setting boundaries. So boundaries are a part of every respectful relationship. But what they're not is 90% of parenting. 90% of parenting is not boundary setting. How many of you think, as parents, that majority of your job is setting boundaries? You देखो ये कैसी माँ इसको मना नहीं कर रही, ये कैसा बाप है कुछ सिखा नहीं रहा है, right? So that's how other people view you. Other people, every time you're out with your child, people are judging you and evaluating you based on your boundaries. क्या आप मना करते हैं या नहीं करते? और मैं ये नहीं कह रही कि आप गलत काम से मना ना करें बच्चे को. I'm not saying that. Like I said, boundaries are a part of any healthy relationship, right? If our child is running onto the road, we save him. That's an example of a great boundary. And that's the problem with boundaries, that there's more to it than we think. So we'll talk about that later, but first we'll talk about co-regulation. So what is co-regulation? Co-regulation is befriending ants. Remember our autonomic nervous system? It's how do we take care of our nervous system so that it takes care of us, right? So children don't know how to do that. And so we have to help them regulate their nervous system. That's what co-regulation is. Next. So this is, we can just go back to one picture. Yeah, so this is a very dysregulated child. What's his ants saying right now? What is ants telling him? Is the world a safe place? And so we should activate what? Survival, yeah? So this child's nervous system is deciding that the world is not a safe place right now, and I need to do fight or flight, activating my survival brain. Then we see this is what a regulated child looks like. You can tell what is happening with their nervous system on their face, right? And the same goes for all of us, right? All of you right now, to me, look relatively regulated, right? This is when your nervous system is ready, wanting to learn, wanting to engage, you're wanting to talk to people, you're wanting to hear and understand and engage with the world. That's what regulation is. And so we have to help the child go from dysregulated to regulated, and that is called co-regulation. Children can't do it by themselves. Why can't they do it themselves? What do you need to be able to regulate yourself? Somebody said it. Thinking. Yes, you need that integration between your feeling brain and your thinking brain. Do you know adults who don't know how to do this? Yes. Yeah, plenty, right? Unfortunately. And so when I moved to Pakistan, people ask me, but don't you get mad here? You know, people are so rude, you know. In the US, people are so nice. And I always tell them, well, yes, because Pakistan has severe collective trauma. You know, we were colonized. When you undergo trauma, it messes with your nervous system for the rest of your life. It's called epigenetics. Epigenetics says that up to 3 generations, the trauma is carried in your body. That means you're very dysregulated. That means you quickly go from a state of regulated to dysregulated. You know, आपने देखा कोई आपके आगे लाइन में आया है, it's all over. You know, आपने देखा किसी ने आपको गाड़ी में पास कर दिया, it's all over. You know, so you know, I have a trauma lens. I look at the world with a trauma lens. That's why when I see someone doing that, I mean, it's not that I don't get angry, maybe I do, but I've just, you know, practiced better regulation skills, and that's what I remind myself. I say, I don't know what this person has been through. So the 3rd generation carries the effects of trauma, right? My grandmother, my dadi, was a young woman when the partition happened. Maybe a lot of you can relate to that, you know? So, and that's the first form of trauma. There's so much other traumas that happen. You know, they were talking about that today in Hall 1 when they were talking about creating a safe world for children. That trauma is not just something big happening, it's the little stuff, right? It's when your caretaker doesn't like you. When your caretaker thinks you're not a good person. ये जो बच्चा है ना, ये ठीक ही नहीं है. इसके अंदर कुछ है. I've heard so many of my, you know, very worried clients say, इसके अंदर ना अपने दादा का गुस्सा भरा हुआ है. You know, this child is just like his grandfather, you know, very angry. And I tell them the good news is anger is not hereditary. We can co-regulate and we can change the future, right? So that's what co-regulation does. It changes the future. So this should be a video. Is it showing up? Oh, well, no, it's not going to be a video because we turned it into a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, I'll talk about it. So in this video, which we can't show you because of technical issues, is that of a father co-regulating his child. And many of you might have actually seen this video because it was very viral on the internet. So what's happening is that there's a little baby girl. She is maybe about 2 years old, and she is having a lot of really big feelings. Okay? And he is just sitting there. I mean, it's too, because so many parents say to me, but how do I co-regulate when my child won't even listen to what I'm saying? The good news is most co-regulation happens with non-verbal cues. Okay? So imagine a person in your life right now who you like to go to every time you're upset. You know, your boss was mean to you, your mother-in-law was mean to you, your friend was mean to you, you know, the driver overtook you, you know, and you're really angry about how that happened. Who do you want to talk to? You know, so think of that person, okay, who you like to talk to. What does that person do to make you feel like you're in a better place? So they listen. So a lot of it is literally just listening. They're not even doing anything. Are they saying, अच्छा नहीं तुम ऐसा करो ना, तुमने उसको 4 सुनानी थी, तुमने क्यों नहीं सुनाई? How come you didn't like do the XYZ? Does this person give you instant solutions? No. They might give you solutions later. They might be like, okay, so, you know, do you want to talk about what, you know, is there anything you want to do differently? Do you want to have a talk with your boss? And you might be like, no, I don't want to talk to my boss. It's fine. It's just, you know, it was a bad day, right? So they listen. What does their face look like? Yeah. What does, do you see anything else on their face? Do they like you? Yes, they accept you. They accept you, they like you, right? What's that? They value you, yeah. They think that you are worthy of respect, even if you're having a bad day, right? Maybe some of the story you told them, in their head they're thinking, so who told you to do that? You know? But they don't say that, because it's okay. You're allowed to have a bad moment. You're allowed to have a bad day. And right now they can see you're struggling. So there's no point. Your thinking brain is not online. There's no point in giving you advice because they're still listening, right? This literally happened to me the other day because me and my sister, we were in Mauritius, and she had a really bad experience with, she almost, she went swimming, she almost drowned. And, I had told her not to go. I had told her the current is really bad, don't go. And when she comes back and she's scared and dysregulated, is the first thing I'm going to tell her, I told you not to go, right? I listened and I said, yeah, I know, that must have been so scary for you. So that's what co-regulation looks like, right? Just let me finish and then we'll go there. So you can see a lot of the co-regulation is non-verbal. Okay, and just can I, okay, ठीक है. And then the last thing, can you go to the next one? So if the child is ready, then you can say something like this. You are feeling sad because your brother took the toy from you and you wish he hadn't. When the child is ready to listen, you can say this. So a lot of the co-regulation is non-verbal. That means if you're dysregulated, you cannot regulate your child. So first of all, take care of yourself. Go in a separate room, take deep breaths, do wuzu, take a walk outside, right? Do something to take care of yourself and then come regulate your child. Next. And finally, the boundaries. So the boundaries need to be strict, as in you say what you mean and you mean what you say. नहीं बेटा उसको हाथ ना लगाओ, right? You're saying over and over, don't touch that. But you're sitting in your spot, you're not doing anything. So I would get up, go and say, beta, I know that looks very interesting and we can't play with that. Here is something we can play with. Okay? So a boundary in that situation, the park, it has a boundary around it. That's clear for the child, right? Children will not go there. You can post a long lecture here at this playground. This was in my neighborhood, but all the kids are still gonna go there. So lectures and words don't appeal to children. What they need is somebody firm and kind. Next. So this is what we call a kind interrupter or helper. So like a lot of parents say to me, until I yell at her, she doesn't listen to me. That's because their nervous system needs that extra help to untangle their brain. So you can go up to them, you can touch them, you can say, it's time to go out. I'm going to help you tie your shoes. So a lot of boundaries actually look like you helping your child instead of just saying things to them. Okay? And then always try to empathize first before you set the boundary. So you can be like, I know that's very interesting. You'd love to play with it, and we can't. I know you want a new cell phone. Tell me about why you want a new cell phone. Oh, because all your friends have it. And because you feel like such an outsider. That sucks. We won't be able to get it. But I totally hear you. I understand how hard it is. So, it's not easy to stay calm. We'll just stop here. But I'm telling you, it gets better, right? 8 years ago, I told you that I was on the floor with my son because I had gotten triggered. But after practice for 8 years and being kind to myself and forgiving myself, I'm able to, about say 90% of the time, not get triggered, unless there's stress, unless I'm extra stressed out. So remember to be kind to yourself and, practice self-compassion and just practice what you've learned today. If you want to know more, I gave Maliha flyers for my workshops. Obviously, it's a 45-minute thing, how much, I was hoping to give you an idea that this is possible. Okay? So if you want to attend one of our 8-week workshops or in-person workshops, they're on the flyer. You can scan it, you can go to my website. and do that. And we can take questions now.
All right, great, Ms. Maryam, Munir, thank you. That was some really deep insight about respectful parenting. And I thank you, audience, for taking out time and attending this session. It was indeed a pleasure to have you around. Let's have some questions if there are any in the audience.
I just want to ask about like the situation that you just explained. When a child is approaching something that they're not supposed to, and you tell them again and again, you go down to their level, how do you actually make them like move away from the situation? How do you actually implement it finally if they're still not listening?
So basically, if you have to repeat the same thing, I would never repeat the same thing twice. I would just say it once, and then I would go physically help the child. I would take them from there, and I would say, oh, you're really upset, you don't like, and that child's gonna be angry and upset. And I want you to remember this one line: crying is not an emergency. Children cry, they cry a lot. That's because why? They're emotional beings, right? And then what are you going to do? You're going to co-regulate. And when you do this over and over, the child will learn. Because we're trying to teach children a lesson when they're like this. That nothing is going in their thinking brain. But when we stay calm and we co-regulate, you're not allowed to play with that. Oh, looks like you're having trouble following it. I'm going to take you to the other room. And you pick up the child, you go to the other room. And you co-regulate. No. No. If you've decided that this is not a safe situation, then you are their confident captain. You have to lead them out of the situation.
All right, thank you, audience. Thank you for your time. And with this, we come towards the end of this session. Thank you so very much.